He thought his twin daughters were gone forever, lost to him 3 years ago. But one cold afternoon, on a crowded bus, he heard their voices singing together like nothing had ever broken them. What he didn't know was that the truth waiting for him that day would shatter not only his heart, but his entire life before it even began again. Where are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments below. And if these kinds of true, powerful stories move you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Now, sit back and dive into this unforgettable journey. The chill in the air bit through every layer I wore, though I clutched my little coat tighter, wishing it could be thicker, warmer. I was just a kid, no more than 8 winters under my belt, but the rough edges of this place had already taught me how unforgiving the cold could be. The town around me was quiet that morning. Wooden buildings wrapped in frost, smoke curling from chimneys as the sun peeked over the distant hills. I wandered near the edge of the settlement where the familiar ended and the wild began. That's when I saw him, an old man, hunched and trembling against the blacksmith's shop. His clothes were thin, worn, decorated with beads and braids that told stories I could not yet understand. I could see the cold was eating at him, the blanket he tried to wrap around himself slipping from his shaking hands. Others passed by without a glance, busy with their own worries, their own lives. But I couldn't. I couldn't just walk away. I hesitated only a moment before undoing the buttons on my coat, the only warm thing I had. My skin prickled as the cold hit my thin dress, but my hands moved without doubt. I knelt beside the old man and offered it to him. "You need this more than I do," I thought, though the words never left my lips. His eyes, tired and blue with cold, met mine. For a heartbeat, he didn't move, as if he was afraid I might be playing a trick. But then, slowly, he took the coat and pulled it around his shoulders. Warmth bloomed between us, not just from the fabric, but from something deeper. What I didn't know then was that I had done something much more than just share a coat. I had awakened a tradition older than the mountains around us. A tradition that demanded honor and recognition for acts of pure generosity. And that tradition was about to change my life forever. The cold settled into my bones as I watched the old man pull my coat tighter around him. His frail hands, weathered and marked with the story of decades under the sun and wind, trembled less now, but I could still see the pain in his eyes, the kind only someone who had known long, hard winters could hold. I didn't know his name yet. I only knew he was suffering. The wind howled low and angry, whipping through the wooden streets and pushing me to make a choice I wasn't sure I was ready for. I wanted to run back inside to the warmth of the trading post, to my mother and the safety of blankets and fire. But I couldn't, not this time. The weight of the coat felt heavy on my heart, as if giving it away had somehow made me smaller, more exposed to the cold that now bit sharply at my skin. I pulled my thin dress closer around me, shivering with every breath. But I stayed. I stayed until the old man slowly rose on unsteady legs and shuffled off toward the edge of the settlement. I wanted to ask where he was going, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I watched as he disappeared into the fog that was creeping low over the plains. That day felt endless, stretched thin like the frost cracking on the window panes. The townspeople barely noticed what had happened. Most were too wrapped up in their own struggles to see a small girl giving away her only coat to a stranger. Some, I'm sure, thought I was foolish. A child risking her own warmth for someone she barely knew. But to me, it was the simplest thing in the world. That evening, when my mother noticed I had no coat, she wrapped me in her shawl and held me close by the fire. Her eyes were full of worry, but also something else. Pride, maybe? She never said anything about my foolishness, only told me to be careful and not catch my death in the cold. Sleep was hard to find that night. I dreamed of the old man's tired eyes and the quiet way he'd accepted my coat, as if it was the most precious gift in the world. I wondered who he was, why he looked so alone in a place where families had lived for generations. And somehow, deep down, I felt like the moment I gave him my coat had changed more than just the temperature on his shoulders. Days passed, and the memory of the old man lingered like a faint smoke on the wind. Then, one afternoon, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, there was a soft knock on our door. I opened it to find him standing there, the old man, no longer trembling, but steady, with a calm I hadn't seen before. He introduced himself as Sterling Rhodes. His voice was quiet but carried weight, the kind of authority earned through years of hardship and respect. He said he had come not just to thank me, but to tell us something important, something that reached far beyond the boundaries of our little settlement. Sterling spoke of a tradition among his people, a circle of generosity, a sacred promise passed down through generations. He explained that my small act of kindness had awakened this tradition, one that hadn't been called upon for decades. A tradition that demanded honor and recognition for a heart pure enough to give without hesitation. I listened with wide eyes, barely understanding all the words but feeling their meaning deep in my chest. Sterling said that his nephew, Gideon Nash, the leader of their tribe, would want to meet us, to honor what had happened in a way that would bind our two worlds together. That night, my mother and I talked long into the dark. Part fear, part curiosity, but mostly hope filled the air. Could something so simple as giving a coat spark a new path for us all? The next morning, Sterling returned, and together we set out toward the tribal settlement a few miles east. The journey was cold and quiet, the snow crunching underfoot, but I felt a strange warmth inside. This wasn't just a trip to meet strangers. It was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. As we approached, the air changed. The landscape seemed alive with history and stories older than any I'd ever heard. The tribal community gathered in a circle, their faces both welcoming and solemn. Beaded clothes shimmered with colors that told tales, and the rhythm of drums echoed softly in the air. Gideon Nash stepped forward, his presence commanding yet kind. He spoke of the circle of generosity, explaining how an act like mine was more than charity, it was a bond that connected hearts and honored sacrifice. One by one, members of the tribe came forward with gifts: handmade moccasins lined with soft fur, carved totems that promised protection, warm blankets woven with stories. Each offering was more than a present. It was a promise that I was now part of something larger, a family beyond blood. Then came the ceremonial coat. It was unlike anything I had ever seen: soft leather, intricate beadwork, thick fur lining that seemed to promise warmth beyond this life. When Gideon placed it on my shoulders, I felt wrapped not only in fabric, but in history, respect, and love. He told me that this coat meant I was under the protection of the entire tribe. If ever I were in danger or need, their doors would open to me as if I were their own. The ceremony ended with a song, ancient and powerful, rising from the circle like a prayer. Their voices wove through the cold air, and I felt tears freeze on my cheeks, not from the cold, but from something deep inside. Returning home, the weight of the coat was heavy with meaning. I knew that life here would never be the same, not just for me, but for everyone. The circle of generosity had been awakened once more, all because a small girl gave away her only coat. The days that followed the ceremony passed in a strange blur, a mixture of wonder, uncertainty, and cautious hope. Wearing the ceremonial coat felt like carrying a secret weight, one that settled on my shoulders with quiet dignity. Every time I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror by the trading post, I saw not just a small, shivering girl, but something more: a symbol of an ancient promise, a bridge between worlds. The townspeople whispered about the event. Some were curious, others skeptical. Old Henrik shook his head as he muttered about foolishness and native superstitions, but the schoolteacher Martha watched me with something like admiration in her eyes. "You did something brave, Maggie," she said quietly one afternoon as I helped her tidy the schoolroom. "More brave than most grown folks around here." I didn't know if I was brave. All I knew was that the cold had grown sharper, the nights longer, but the warmth inside me from the coat and the promise it held was something no winter could freeze. Mother was quieter than before. She had always been strong, but since that day, I noticed the way her eyes lingered on me longer, full of unspoken worries. She worked harder, trading more goods, trying to stretch every penny. The coat had been a Christmas gift, and now, wrapped around me, it was worth more than anything the trading post could sell. One evening, just as the sun slipped behind the distant hills, there came a knock at our door. Sterling stood outside again, his weathered face lined with the traces of the cold but firm with purpose. "We must prepare," he said simply, his voice low but urgent. "The tribe wishes to invite you to the winter feast. It is an honor, but also a responsibility. You must come with an open heart." Mother hesitated. The tribal settlement was far, and we were strangers to many there. But I felt a pull I couldn't explain. The thought of being part of something larger, a community that had embraced me, despite everything, filled me with a courage I hadn't known I possessed. We agreed to go. The next morning, Sterling led us through the snow-blanketed plains toward the tribal village. The journey was harsh. Wind whipped at our faces, and the cold gnawed at exposed skin. But beneath the raw chill was a strange peace, as if the land itself welcomed us. As we arrived, the settlement was alive with movement and song. The tribe had gathered in their finest clothing, bright beads and furs shining even under the pale winter sun. Children laughed and ran between tents, while elders tended fires that crackled with ancient stories. Gideon Nash greeted us at the edge of the circle, his face lighting with a rare smile. "Welcome, Clementine, Magnolia," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a leader and the warmth of a friend. "Tonight, we celebrate the circle of generosity, your part in its rebirth." That evening, as shadows lengthened and stars began to prick the velvet sky, the feast began. The air filled with a rich sense of roasting meats, sweet herbs, and pine smoke. Tribal members shared stories, their voices weaving history and hope into the night. I sat wrapped in the ceremonial coat, feeling the weight of eyes upon me, not with judgment, but with respect. Elders nodded approvingly. Children stared wide-eyed. And even the warriors, fierce and proud, seemed softened by the moment. Gideon spoke again, recounting the tale of the morning when I had given my coat to Sterling. His words were not just a retelling, but a teaching. A reminder of the power of selflessness in a world often too harsh for kindness. As the night deepened, a hush fell over the circle. The drums began to beat, steady and slow, a heartbeat connecting past and present. Then, one by one, the tribe rose to offer gifts and blessings. An elderly woman stepped forward with a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. "For you, young one," she said, placing it gently in my hands. Inside were moccasins, lined with the softest fur, crafted to keep my feet warm through the coldest nights. Another man presented a carved wooden figure, a totem of protection. "Carry this always," he said. "It will watch over your spirit." One by one, the offerings came: blankets woven with stories, pouches filled with herbs, combs carved from elk horn. Each gift was a promise, a symbol of the tribe's acceptance and a reminder that generosity was never one-sided. Yet, amid the celebration, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The bond formed that day was powerful, but I knew the wider world, the settlers, the merchants, the government officials, would not all see it so simply. There were old wounds and mistrust that lingered like shadows on the horizon. The next morning, as snowflakes drifted softly from a gray sky, Sterling pulled me aside. His eyes were grave. "Magnolia," he said, "what you have started is rare and beautiful. But the path ahead will not be easy. There are those who will resist this new bond between your people and ours. You must be strong." I nodded, the weight of his words settling over me like a thick winter cloak. I was just a girl, but somehow I had become a symbol, a bridge between two worlds that history had long kept apart. Over the weeks that followed, the circle of generosity began to ripple through the settlement. Some townsfolk embraced the change, their eyes opening to the possibility of friendship and respect. Others resisted, clinging to suspicion and fear. At school, Martha encouraged us to share the story, to teach the children about kindness and courage. But at the trading post, Henrik and others whispered warnings, their voices sharp with distrust. One afternoon, as I helped my mother prepare goods for the market, a group of men from the settlement approached. Their faces were stern, their eyes cold. "You're getting too close to those natives," one of them said, voice low and threatening. "This kind of friendship brings nothing but trouble." I felt a cold prick of fear, but stood tall. They honored me, I said quietly. They showed kindness when others turned away. The man sneered, but said no more. Still, the warning lingered in the air like frost. That night, Sterling came to us with news. There are talks among the government officials, he said grimly. They do not trust the new ties being formed. We must prepare to stand together, not just as neighbors, but as one. It was then that the true meaning of the circle of generosity became clear. It was not just about gifts or ceremonies. It was a pact, a promise to protect and support one another in the face of hardship and hostility. I realized that my small act of kindness had grown into something far greater, a movement that challenged old fears and invited a future built on trust. The winter wore on, harsh and unyielding, but the warmth of the circle held firm. Our lives intertwined with those of the tribe in ways I had never imagined. And through it all, I kept the ceremonial coat close, a symbol of hope and a reminder that even the smallest gift could change the course of many lives. Winter had deepened its grasp on the land. The early light crept slowly over the snow-laden hills, casting long, cold shadows across the settlement. Every breath hung like smoke in the frosty air, and the world seemed muffled beneath a thick blanket of silence. Yet beneath this stillness, a tension was building, subtle, like the crackle before a wildfire. I could feel it in the way neighbors glanced sideways at the tribal members passing through town, in the stiff nods and tight smiles exchanged over the fences. The circle of generosity, though sacred and powerful, was something new, something unsettling for many. Mother kept the hearth fire burning bright, but I saw the worry deepen in her eyes each night. It wasn't just the harsh cold outside, it was the unknown storm gathering on the horizon. The morning after a particularly fierce snowstorm, Sterling appeared at our door with news that quickened my pulse. They plan to send officials, he said quietly, removing his frost-coated hat. They will come to question the tribe's intentions, to test the strength of your bond with us. I swallowed hard. I had expected resistance. I just hadn't known it would come so soon. Gideon Nash was already preparing his people. The tribe gathered in small groups, their voices low but steady with determination. The old ways taught resilience, and now they would be tested. The officials arrived like a storm themselves, men in heavy coats and dark eyes, sharp with suspicion. They were strangers to the land and its traditions, carrying with them the weight of laws and decrees that seemed as cold and unyielding as the winter winds. I watched from the edge of the settlement as they confronted Gideon and the elders. Their words were clipped, their questions pointed, probing, seeking to uncover what they saw as weaknesses, or worse, threats. But Gideon met them with quiet strength, speaking not just with words, but with the dignity of his people behind him. Sterling stood close by, a steady presence, and I felt a flicker of hope. The hearing stretched through the day and into the evening. As night fell, the tribe gathered around their fires, faces etched with fatigue but unbroken in spirit. Later, Sterling came to me beneath the stars, the ceremonial coat wrapped tightly around him like a shield. They will watch us closely, he said, but your courage has sparked something powerful. The circle is alive again, and it cannot be undone. That night, sleep was elusive. I lay awake, the weight of the coat pressing against me, feeling the immense responsibility it symbolized. This was no longer just my story. It was our story of two peoples, bound by respect, challenged by fear, yet hopeful. Days passed, and the settlement slowly changed. The drumbeats of the tribe echoed alongside the distant clatter of wagon wheels and the hum of the trading post. Children from both communities played cautiously together, their laughter a fragile but bright thread weaving through the cold air. One afternoon, as I walked near the riverbank, I found myself alone with Gideon. His weathered face held years of wisdom, but his eyes were kind. "You have awakened more than tradition, young one," he said softly. "You have awakened trust, and trust is a seed that must be nurtured carefully." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle within me. "The circle of generosity is not just about gifts," Gideon continued. It is about a promise that no matter the hardships, no matter the storms, we stand for one another. We protect what is sacred. I looked down at the coat that draped my shoulders, tracing the intricate beadwork with my fingertips. But how do we protect it? I asked. When there are those who want to tear it apart? Gideon's gaze grew steady. With courage, with truth, and with actions that speak louder than words. In the days that followed, our fragile peace faced more tests. Suspicion from some settlers gave way to whispered threats. Rumors spread like wildfire of unrest, of land disputes, of old grudges stirred anew. But alongside these shadows, there were moments of light. A group of townsfolk joined the tribe for a shared meal. Children from both communities learned each other's stories, languages mingling like rivers meeting. Mother, once hesitant, found herself working alongside tribal women, exchanging recipes, crafts, and smiles. Even Henrik, begrudgingly, accepted a gift from one of the elders, a carved wooden bird that seemed to hold a piece of the winter sky. One evening, as the full moon rose, the tribe invited us to a sacred gathering, a night of storytelling, where the ancient spirits were called to witness and bless. We sat in a circle beneath the stars, the firelight dancing on faces etched with reverence and hope. The stories told were not just of old battles and lost times, but of renewal, of bonds reborn, of a future built on shared strength. As I listened, I realized that the coat I wore was more than warmth against the cold. It was a mantle of hope, fragile but unbreakable. But the coming months would demand more than hope. They would require sacrifice, resilience, and the unyielding belief that kindness could be a revolution. For now, I held on to that belief, wrapping the coat tighter around me, ready to face whatever the winter and the world might bring. The cold did not relent as winter pressed deeper into the land, but neither did the fire of change simmer in my chest. Each morning, I pulled the ceremonial coat tighter around my small frame and faced the world anew, a world shifting beneath frozen skies and fragile hopes. The officials' scrutiny did not end with that first confrontation. Days after the hearing, a notice came to the settlement. A delegation from the county seat would visit. They intended to review tribal claims, assess land usage, and I suspected test the limits of the newly rekindled relationship. Rumors swirled like the snowdrift, some hopeful, many fearful. Whispers of broken promises and old grievances leaked through the town, threatening to undo the fragile bridge our kindness had built. Mother's worry etched deeper into her face. She tried to keep busy at the trading post, but her eyes often drifted toward the horizon, searching for answers she could not find. I found solace near the river's edge, where the frozen currents whispered secrets beneath sheets of ice. It was there, in the solitude of cold water and cracking ice, that I wrestled with the weight of what had begun. It was not just the coat I wore. It was a story of generosity and honor reborn that had now wrapped itself around the lives of so many. One afternoon, as the delegation arrived, the settlement buzzed with tension. Men in fine coats stepped carefully among the worn wooden buildings, their polished boots clicking sharply on snow-packed ground. Their leader was a stern man named Mr. Caldwell, known for his rigid views and little patience for what he called tribal nonsense. I watched from the trading post's shadow as Caldwell and his men met with Gideon and the tribal council beneath a large, snow-dusted oak. Words were exchanged, faces tightened, and the cold seemed to sharpen with every passing hour. That night, I sat with Sterling beside the fire. His gaze was distant, burdened by decades of witnessing cycles of mistrust and broken promises. "They come with questions," he said slowly. "But not all questions seek truth. Some are meant to divide." I nodded, understanding the gravity behind his words. The circle of generosity was no longer a quiet tradition of our people. It was a beacon in the storm, one that others sought to extinguish. But Gideon's spirit remained unbroken. The next morning, he invited the delegation to witness a ceremony, a demonstration of what the circle meant to his people, and, by extension, to the entire land. The clearing near the settlement became a stage of ancient songs, ritual dances, and shared stories. Men and women in vibrant regalia moved with grace, their voices rising in chants that spoke of ancestors, resilience, and sacred bonds. I stood close, wrapped in the ceremonial coat that shimmered under the pale winter sun. For a moment, I was not just a girl from a trading post. I was a symbol, a living testament to a new chapter. The delegation watched in silence, some faces softening, others hardening. Caldwell, however, remained skeptical, his eyes narrowing as the ritual unfolded. Days later, the tension reached a breaking point. Caldwell announced an ultimatum: the tribal lands must be surveyed, their boundaries redrawn under county law, or the treaty risks being voided. Gideon refused to accept terms imposed without respect for tradition. The standoff rippled through the settlement like an earthquake. One bitter night, as the wind howled through bare branches, the tribe gathered to decide their next move. The elders spoke of honor and survival, of standing firm in the face of injustice. Sterling turned to me, his voice heavy with meaning. "The circle is tested in storms, child. Your act sparked this, but the journey ahead will ask more than kindness." I realized then that my gift was not an end, but a beginning, a spark that ignited ancient powers and modern conflicts alike. The next day, with snow swirling like a veil over the land, I joined the tribal members in their march to the county seat. We carried no weapons, only the strength of our conviction and the stories of generations. The journey was arduous, the cold biting at our faces and hands. But with every step, the bond between us grew stronger. When we arrived, the halls of government loomed cold and indifferent, a stark contrast to the warmth and spirit we brought with us. We spoke not with anger, but with truth, sharing the sacred tradition that had been reborn, the promise of protection symbolized by the coat, and the need for respect and recognition. Slowly, walls began to crack. Officials listened. Some skeptics softened. Even Caldwell's stern facade showed flickers of doubt. After long hours, a tentative agreement was reached, a recognition of tribal boundaries, respect for traditions, and a commitment to coexistence. The circle of generosity had proven more than a ritual. It was a bridge, a promise that transcended winter's cold and old wounds. Returning home, the settlement felt different, not just because of the thawing snow, but because of the thawing hearts. Mother embraced me tightly, pride shining through her tired eyes. Sterling smiled, his old hands steady and warm as he took the coat from me and draped it gently over my shoulders once more. "You carried more than cloth that day," he said softly. "You carried hope." And I knew, deep within, that the story we had begun was far from over. The days that followed the tentative agreement were a fragile dance between hope and uncertainty. Winter's grip loosened only slightly, and the cold still gnawed at the edges of every day. But beneath the frost, a new warmth began to grow. I could feel it in the way the townspeople looked at me, not as the little girl who gave away her coat, but as a symbol of something bigger, something impossible to ignore. Mother worked harder than ever at the trading post, her hands roughened by cold and toil, but her spirit was steadier now. The gift of that coat, the ceremony, and the battle for respect had altered not only our lives, but the rhythm of the entire settlement. One morning, as the pale sunlight spilled over the hills, I was invited to meet with Gideon and the tribal elders in a circle beneath the great oak tree that stood sentinel near the heart of their village. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and frozen earth. Gideon looked older than ever, his face etched with lines carved by years of leadership and sacrifice, but his eyes burned with the same fire that had called us to unity. "We must protect what we have started," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "Not just the land, but the respect and trust between our peoples. This coat you wear, this gift you gave it, is more than cloth. It is a symbol of our shared destiny." The elders nodded in solemn agreement, their hands weathered and steady as they placed sacred items beside us. Stones inscribed with ancient symbols, bundles of herbs wrapped in leather, and carved wooden talismans. I listened intently, feeling the weight of their words settling deep within me. Over the following weeks, the settlement began to change. The boundaries that had once been invisible lines drawn by outsiders were now honored by the townsfolk and tribal members alike. The trading post flourished as the exchange of goods and stories between the communities grew richer. Yet not everyone was pleased. One evening, a shadow fell across the settlement when a band of horsemen rode in under the cover of dusk. They were strangers, rough men with cold eyes, intent clear in the grip of their weapons. Whispers spread quickly. They were bounty hunters hired to stir trouble, to test the fragile peace with violence. That night, the trading post's warm glow was pierced by the crack of gunfire and shouting. I remembered the fear like a cold hand, clutching my heart as men and women scrambled to defend their homes and families. But amid the chaos, something remarkable happened. The tribal warriors who had once been strangers stood shoulder to shoulder with the settlers, their bows and rifles raised not in anger toward each other, but against the common threat. I watched from the doorway as Gideon, Sterling, and others moved through the fray with calm authority, guiding both groups with a fierce determination. The battle was swift but fierce. The bandits, unprepared for united resistance, fled into the night, their plans shattered. In the aftermath, the settlement was quieter than usual, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and the echo of gunfire still ringing in our ears. But what struck me most was the way people moved more closely bound than ever before. That night, gathered around the fire, Sterling's voice cut through the crackling flames. The circle of generosity is not just about giving. It is about standing together when the world tries to tear us apart. His eyes found mine, steady and knowing. Your coat, he said, has become a banner for all of us. It reminds us that kindness can build bridges, and courage can hold them strong. The days grew longer, the sun's warmth promising the end of winter. But the lessons of the season lingered etched in the snow-melt streams and the renewed bonds between our people. I understood then that my journey was just beginning. The gift I had given, the traditions rekindled, and the alliances forged would shape not only my life, but the future of everyone who called this land home. And as I lay beneath a sky bursting with stars, wrapped in the coat that carried more meaning than I had ever imagined, I whispered a silent promise. To protect this new world with all the strength my small heart could muster. Spring arrived slowly, like a cautious whisper after the brutal winter. The earth beneath the melting snow was soft and dark, ready to bloom anew. But the lessons from the cold still lingered in the hearts of the settlement. For me, the coat I wore was no longer just a garment. It was a constant reminder, a mantle of responsibility that stretched far beyond my years. The tribal people and settlers, once wary and distant, now shared more than just land and trade. We shared stories, laughter, and even tears. I found myself welcomed into their circles, learning the old songs, the names of the plants, and the meanings behind their sacred symbols. Gideon became more than a leader in my eyes. He was a teacher, a guardian of histories that intertwined with my own in ways I never imagined possible. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through budding branches, Gideon took me to a secluded part of the forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the song of a nearby creek created a gentle rhythm. He knelt beside a patch of wildflowers, bright purple blooms edged with white, and spoke softly. These, he said, are known as Spirit's breath. They remind us that even in the harshest times, life will find a way to return. His eyes held a depth of meaning that reached beyond the surface of his words. The circle we began with your gift is still turning, but it is fragile. There are those who do not understand what we share, who fear change. I nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle heavily. But that afternoon was also a moment of hope. Back in the settlement, our efforts to bridge worlds continued. The trading post saw new goods arriving, handcrafted moccasins adorned with beads, fresh herbs bundled and dried by the tribal women, and stories shared over warm meals. Mother and Clementine became close with several tribal women, exchanging recipes, remedies, and laughter. Yet, even as bonds grew, the shadow of past tensions hovered nearby. One morning, a messenger arrived, breathless and urgent. A neighboring settler town was facing escalating violence. Rumors spoke of raids and reprisals that threatened to spill over into our peaceful settlement. Gideon gathered the elders and tribal leaders. I was allowed to listen from the edge of the circle, understanding that this was a matter of survival for all. "We must stand united," Gideon said, his voice low but firm. "Our unity is our strength. If we falter now, the cycles of mistrust will return." Plans were made to send envoys, men and women from both communities, to negotiate peace and seek understanding with the neighboring towns. The responsibility of being the symbol of our unity pressed heavily on me. I was no longer just a child wrapped in a sacred coat, I was a beacon of hope and change. That evening, as the stars blinked awake overhead, I sat by the fire with Sterling. "Your gift sparked a fire," he told me, his voice rough but warm. "But now, you must help it burn steady, not wild." His hand rested gently on my shoulder, a rare gesture of affection and trust. Over the coming weeks, envoys traveled, messages were exchanged, and cautious peace talks began. But peace is a fragile thing, one that requires constant tending. In the meantime, life in our settlement continued with quiet miracles. Crops planted and harvested, children playing between the wooden buildings and the trees, and songs sung in 2 languages, weaving together a new shared story. One morning, a surprising visitor arrived, an old woman from the tribal community, bearing a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She approached me carefully, her eyes bright with a mix of pride and reverence. Inside the bundle was a small carved figure, a bird with outstretched wings, made from polished wood and inlaid with tiny stones. "This," she explained, "is the messenger. It represents your role not just to protect, but to carry the message of unity beyond these lands." The figure fit perfectly in my hand, a symbol of the journey ahead. As the days grew warmer and the earth awakened, I realized that the true power of the circle of generosity was not in grand ceremonies or gifts, but in the quiet, persistent acts of kindness and courage that stitched our worlds together. And I was ready to carry that message, no matter where the winds might take me. Spring was no longer a promise, it was in full bloom. The settlement and the tribal lands were awash with color and life. Green shoots pushed through the softening soil, wildflowers painted the hillsides, and the air was heavy with the scent of fresh growth. Yet beneath this renewal lay a fragile peace, a delicate thread binding 2 worlds once torn apart by suspicion and fear. For me, the days now carried a weight I was only beginning to understand. The coat I wore was no longer simply a symbol of generosity. It was a mantle of responsibility that shaped my every step. Since the ceremony, my life had shifted in ways I never imagined possible. I was invited to tribal gatherings, where the songs and stories of ancient ancestors filled the air. I learned the significance of the beadwork in the ceremonial clothing, the meanings hidden within every color and pattern. I was taught how to respectfully gather herbs, how to listen to the wind, and how to honor the earth beneath my feet. Gideon, the tribal leader, had become a steady presence in my life. His voice carried the wisdom of generations, but also a fierce determination to preserve his people's traditions while building bridges to the settlers. He was patient with me, guiding me through customs I had never known, but always expecting me to grow beyond the limits of childhood innocence. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and bathed the world in golden light, Gideon took me by the hand and led me deep into the forest, to a place where the trees formed a natural cathedral. Moss-covered stones stood in a circle, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. "This is where our people have gathered for thousands of years," he told me quietly. "It is a place of memory and power. The spirits of our ancestors are strongest here." We sat together on a flat stone, and he began to speak in his native tongue, his voice low and rhythmic. I listened, feeling the cadence seep into my bones. When he finished, he translated for me. "The circle of generosity is not just a tradition. It is a bond that connects us, all settlers and natives alike. It teaches that kindness is not weakness, but strength. That sacrifice for another is the purest form of courage." His eyes met mine, serious and bright. "You carry this lesson with you now, Maggie. It is your duty to honor it." The weight of those words settled on me like the soft earth beneath my feet. Days later, news arrived that threatened the fragile peace we had built. A neighboring settlement, farther south and less welcoming of the tribal people, was embroiled in violence. Raiders had attacked, and whispers of retribution spread like wildfire. The threat was not distant. It could easily spill over into our home. Gideon convened a council, summoning elders and trusted warriors from the tribal community, as well as leaders from the settlers. The air in the meeting was thick with tension. Years of mistrust and unspoken grievances hung between the two groups. I was allowed to observe, a silent witness to the gravity of the moment. Gideon's voice cut through the murmur. "We stand at a crossroads," he said. "Our unity is our shield. If we fracture now, the cycle of violence will consume us all." Plans were made swiftly. A delegation, composed of tribal warriors and settlers, would journey to the troubled settlement to negotiate peace and prevent bloodshed. I felt the surge of fear and hope mingling within me. The role I had been given was no longer symbolic. It demanded courage. That night, as the fire crackled and the stars stretched overhead, Sterling sat beside me. "You have sparked a light," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "Now you must help it burn steady." His hand rested gently on my shoulder, a rare gesture of affection and trust from the elder who had first inspired this journey. In the days that followed, the settlement buzzed with preparations and whispers. Women wove blankets, embroidered with symbols of peace. Men sharpened their tools but tempered their hearts with prayers for calm. Children learned songs of unity, their voices rising in harmony. Then came the day when the delegation departed. I watched as Gideon led the group, his presence commanding yet calm. Sterling remained behind, his eyes reflecting both pride and concern. The journey was long and fraught with uncertainty. Messages carried on horseback, campfires flickered with cautious optimism, and each step was a test of trust. Meanwhile, back home, life in the settlement continued its steady rhythm. Mother and I grew closer to the tribal women, sharing crafts, remedies, and stories that bridged our worlds. The trading post became a place of exchange not just for goods, but for friendship. One morning, a figure arrived, a tribal elder named Yana, bearing a small, carefully wrapped bundle. She approached me with reverence, her eyes shining with a mix of pride and solemnity. Inside the bundle was a carved wooden bird, its wings outstretched as if ready to take flight. "This is the messenger," she explained softly. "It symbolizes your role not only to protect, but to carry the story of unity beyond these lands." The figure felt warm in my hand, a tangible connection to the journey ahead. As the weeks turned to months, the peace talks progressed, fragile but hopeful. The circle of generosity, once dormant, was now a living thread weaving together lives that had once been separate. And yet, the path forward was not without shadows. One evening, as twilight bled into night, I overheard a conversation between settlers wary of change. "Mark my words," one man muttered. "Mixing with those people will only bring trouble." But others, like Martha, the school teacher, spoke with conviction. "We must embrace this chance for peace. Maggie's kindness showed us what is possible." The tension between hope and fear, acceptance and resistance, pulsed through the settlement like a heartbeat. Through it all, I stood at the crossroads, a girl who had given her coat and found herself wrapped in the warmth of a community reborn. The coat, the ceremonies, the gifts, they were symbols. But the true gift was the courage to see beyond old wounds, to build something new from the ashes of the past. As the sun rose on a crisp morning, I realized that the circle of generosity was not just a tradition. It was a promise that even in the coldest, darkest times, kindness could light the way. And I was ready to carry that light, wherever it might lead. The dawn broke cold and clear, slicing through the heavy silence that had settled over the settlement in the days before. The wind whispered through the bare branches, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth, and a promise, one that seemed fragile but real, that the long shadow of winter might finally be giving way to spring's warmth. Yet beneath the quiet surface, an undercurrent of tension pulsed, like a hidden river ready to surge. News from the southern settlement had not brought the peace we all hoped for. The talks had faltered. Old wounds bled fresh, and the threat of violence loomed closer than ever. I stood at the edge of the trading post, the coat once given away, now returned with blessings and meaning wrapped tightly around me. Its weight was no longer a burden but a mantle of purpose, a shield against the cold outside and the uncertainty within. The people of both worlds were watching, waiting. I could feel their hopes, their fears, their fragile trust pressing down like the heavy winter sky. It was in this crucible that I realized the true meaning of what I had set in motion. The circle of generosity was more than a ritual. It was a living, breathing bond, fragile yet unbreakable, tested by fire and cold, by doubt and sacrifice. The morning's light revealed a restless gathering. Traders, settlers, and tribal members mingled with quiet urgency, sharing news, whispering fears. Gideon stood among them, his posture steady, his eyes sharp but tired. The weight of leadership bore down on him, as it did on all of us. I approached him quietly, the carved wooden bird the messenger clutched in my hand. He turned, a flicker of relief in his gaze. "We have come far, Maggie," he said softly. "But the hardest part lies ahead." His words settled over me like a stone. "Will the others listen?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Gideon's jaw tightened. "Some will. Others, not so easily. Fear can blind the best of intentions." A sudden murmur swept through the crowd. From the shadows emerged a rider, dust-covered and breathless. He carried a letter, stamped with the seal of the Southern Settlements Council. Gideon broke the seal, scanning the words with growing concern. "They have rejected our terms," he announced grimly. "The threat of war grows." A hush fell, heavy and suffocating. But then, from the crowd, a voice rang out, a voice I had come to trust, steady and clear. "We will not let this end in blood," said Sterling, stepping forward despite his age and frailty. "There is still time to change the course." He turned to me, his eyes shining with fierce hope. "Maggie, the circle of generosity demands more than kindness. It calls for courage. Now is the time for yours." I felt the weight of his gaze, the years of wisdom behind it. I swallowed hard, the enormity of the moment crashing over me. It was no longer about a coat, or a ceremony, or even peace between two peoples. It was about the future, the lives, the dreams, the fragile threads connecting us all. That evening, under a sky quilted with stars, we gathered once more in the great clearing at the heart of the tribal lands. Fires burned bright, their flames dancing and flickering, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into the past and the future all at once. The circle formed anew, elders, warriors, settlers, children, all standing shoulder to shoulder, bound by the thread of a shared purpose. Gideon raised his hands, calling for silence. His voice rang out, rich and resonant. "Tonight, we honor not just a single act of generosity," he said, "but the spirit that must guide us forward, courage in the face of fear, kindness that binds us beyond borders, and the promise that our children will inherit a world better than ours." He turned to me. "Maggie, you have shown us what it means to give without expectation. Tonight, we ask you to lead us." "Ohushfel." I stepped forward, the messenger in my hand, feeling the eyes of hundreds upon me. My heart pounded not with fear, but with resolve. I spoke then, words trembling but true. "We stand at the edge of a great divide," I said, "but we also stand with the power to build a bridge. This coat, this tradition, it is not just a symbol. It is a call to see each other as family, to choose kindness over suspicion, and to face the unknown together." The circle erupted in song, voices rising in a harmony that filled the night sky with hope. As the music swelled, I felt a hand slip into mine, Sterling's weathered fingers warm and steady. Together, we watched the fires burn, lighting the path ahead. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Messages were sent, emissaries dispatched to both settlements, bearing words of peace and the promise of unity. The southern settlement, pressured by the undeniable force of this new alliance, began to reconsider. Slowly, cautiously, the tide began to turn. One morning, a rider arrived bearing a new letter, this one bearing acceptance and the desire for dialogue. Tears pricked my eyes as I held the parchment. The circle of generosity had sparked something greater than any of us had dared hope. In the months that followed, the settlements and the tribal lands forged a bond rooted in respect and shared purpose. We rebuilt broken fences, shared harvests, and celebrated festivals that blended our traditions. The coat I wore became a symbol of this new era, not just a garment, but a promise stitched into every thread. And yet, amidst the joy, I knew the path forward would never be easy. Old fears and prejudices lingered like ghosts in the shadows. But now, we had a story of a little girl's simple act of kindness that awakened an ancient tradition and kindled the flame of hope. That story would be told around campfires and hearths, whispered by elders and sung by children. It would remind us that generosity is sacred, courage is contagious, and even the smallest act can change the course of history. And as I stood on the threshold of that new dawn, I understood that the true gift of the circle of generosity was not in the coat, the ceremonies, or even the gifts. It was in the unbreakable bonds forged between hearts willing to see beyond themselves. For in the wild west, where the cold winds bite and the land is harsh, it is kindness that truly keeps us warm. The air was crisp with the promise of spring, yet the shadows of the past winter still lingered, clinging like ghosts in the corners of every mind. The settlement was alive with anticipation, a fragile but growing hope weaving its way through every whispered conversation and every wary glance toward the horizon. I stood at the edge of the clearing once more, the ceremonial coat draped around my shoulders, its warmth a comforting reminder of the journey that had brought us here. The intricate beadwork shimmered softly in the early morning light, each stitch telling stories of kindness, sacrifice, and unbreakable bonds. But this morning, it was not just a symbol, it was a beacon. Today, the leaders of the southern settlement would arrive. After weeks of tension, negotiations, and uncertain peace, they had agreed to meet in the heart of this land, the land that had borne witness to an ancient tradition, reborn by a little girl's simple act of generosity. My heart beat steadily, each thump a reminder of the fragile threads holding this moment together. Years ago, I had given away my only coat to a stranger, a man shivering against the bitter cold. Little did I know that small gesture would set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through two worlds, bridging divides and healing wounds thought permanent. Now, as the sun rose higher, I felt the weight of every eye upon me, settlers, tribal members, elders, children, all waiting, hoping for a miracle. And I knew that this day was more than a meeting. It was a turning point for all of us. The first riders appeared on the horizon, a small group, cautious but determined. Their horses stirred the dust as they approached, the banners of the Southern Council fluttering faintly in the breeze. Gideon stood beside me, his presence steady and reassuring. The years of leadership, negotiation, and heartbreak had etched lines into his face, but his eyes shone with the same fierce hope that had drawn me into this journey. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. More than ever. The council riders dismounted, their faces a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Among them was a man, the leader, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes sharp and calculating, yet betraying a flicker of something softer as he took in the scene before him. Gideon stepped forward, his voice carrying across the silent clearing. "We gather here today not as enemies, but as neighbors. Not as strangers, but as people who share this land, this sky, and the hopes of those who come after us." The leader of the Southern Council nodded, his expression serious but open. "We have heard the story of generosity, courage, and tradition. We come to understand, to listen, and to find a path forward." I felt my breath catch. This was the moment where everything could change, where fear could give way to trust. Stepping forward, I spoke, my voice steady though my heart raced. "This coat," I said, gesturing to the garment wrapped around me, "is more than fabric and beadwork. It carries the promise of protection, the spirit of generosity, and the strength of a community bound by kindness. I paused, searching the faces before me. When I gave my coat to a stranger that cold morning, I gave away my safety. But in return, I received something far greater: a family, a tradition, and a hope for peace. The clearing fell silent, the weight of my words settling like a warm embrace. Then, from the edge of the circle, Sterling stepped forward. His frail form was steadier now. The coat I had given him before still wrapped around his shoulders, a symbol of the bond that had brought us together. "My people have long known the power of generosity," he said, his voice strong despite his age. "But it was this young girl's act, simple, pure, and selfless, that reminded us all what it truly means to be human." He looked at me, pride shining in his eyes. "Her courage has awakened an ancient tradition and rekindled the hope for a future where we walk side by side, not as strangers, but as one people." The council leader stepped forward, extending his hand. "Then let this day mark the beginning of a new chapter, one of respect, of shared stories, and of unity." Gideon took the hand firmly, the gesture sealing a promise. Around us, the circle widened, voices rising in song melodies old as the earth itself, blending with new voices, new hopes. Children danced, elders smiled, and for the first time in a long time, the land felt whole. That night, as the fires burned bright and the stars shone down like ancient witnesses, I sat wrapped in the ceremonial coat, surrounded by friends and family from two worlds. I thought back to that cold morning when I had made a choice born from compassion and the simple desire to help. Who would have known that a single act, as small as giving away a coat, could weave a story that would change so many lives? But change had come in the warmth of shared traditions, in the strength of forgiveness, and in the courage to reach out when it seemed easier to turn away. And as I looked into the firelight, I understood that the circle of generosity was not just a tradition. It was a living promise that no matter how cold the world may be, kindness can ignite a flame that warms generations to come. If you were in their shoes, would you fight the same battle? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and don't forget to like the video. Explore the other videos on your screen for more powerful stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.